Well, welcome in on this Wednesday. It's November 22nd, 1963. No, that's 60 years ago when President Kennedy was shot and assassinated. We could spend an entire 3 hours on all that. But that's not what you came here for. You came here to find out what's going on with the state's gun magazine ban and registry. A lot of moving pieces and different court cases, and we'll touch on that. We'll also connect with Todd Vandermyde a little bit later on, expecting to send him a Zoom link to join us live here early this Wednesday morning, right before Thanksgiving. But also, we'll have to do a council corral of last night's Springfield City Council meeting. So tons to get to. Thanks for hanging out. Neo72, the first in the chat room, says yes. All right, well, thumbs up. Yes, you've made it here. So let's go ahead and get right on into it with what we've got to cover, and it's a whole bunch of stuff. So stay tuned. It is Bishop on Air here on your favorite social media channels, be it Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can find me on Instagram as well and other channels, so be sure to check that out. Could a district federal judge rule before the January 1st deadline to register firearms in the state of Illinois as part of the state law? Could they rule before January 1st to block that registration deadline? Looks like that could be the case after a status hearing yesterday in the Southern District of Illinois. Judge Stephen McGlynn hearing from the plaintiffs and from the defense as to the scheduling for oral arguments, and they went ahead and set a December 12th date for those oral arguments. It's going to be virtually. We will, of course, be covering that in some detail, so definitely want to stay with us and click like, subscribe, get the notifications. If you want to support what we're doing each and every weekday morning, you can also check in with the shop below, at least on the YouTube channel, or go to my website, bishoponair.com. But my full-time gig, I'm a reporter for the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network, and I delve deep into all kinds of issues happening at the State House. But here we've got, of course, as we've been tracking day in, day out, the ongoing litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban. January 10th was when Governor J.B. Pritzker enacted the ban, and that included a ban on magazines over the capacity of 10 for rifles and 15 for handguns. Now, all of this also included a registration component, and that registration component is opening October 1st. It's been open for, a month and a half, if not, a good full 7 weeks or so. We're rapidly approaching the 2 full months it's been open, and Illinois State Police had yet to update their latest statistics on who is actually registering their firearms. And we haven't seen this updated since last Tuesday. I think they actually updated it last Monday. But anyway, there's only been 3,439 individuals who've disclosed that they have a banned item. And that disclosure, if you compare that with some of the numbers in as far as FOID card holders, there's 2.4 million FOID card holders. So that only works out to be about 0.14% or so. And you've got a total amount of firearms that have been disclosed at about 6,600, close to. So the registry, at least if you want to look at how many FOID card holders there are compared to how many have actually disclosed they have a banned firearm, again, that's 0.14%. But that just shows you that, the registry now 2 weeks, 2 months almost open. The January 1st deadline rapidly approaching, still a lot of litigation on this. There's been questions as to what's going to happen. How is this going to ultimately play out, especially as there's continued challenges? So let's go ahead and review what happened yesterday in the Southern District of Illinois. But before we get there, got to give you that background, all right? So federal firearms licensees of Illinois and other plaintiffs were back in the Southern District yesterday with a status hearing. They were in front of Judge Stephen McGlynn. Preliminary injunction was being requested to block the January 1st deadline. So that was what it was issue, at least the scheduling of the oral arguments was what was at issue in the status hearing yesterday. But if you recall, Judge McGlynn back in late April on the Second Amendment question, he actually issued a preliminary injunction as part of consolidated cases that went to the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. And that 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ultimately did have a ruling where they vacated McGlynn's preliminary injunction against the law on the basis of Second Amendment grounds, on a likelihood that the plaintiffs would succeed on the merits. the 3-panel appeals court said that the state was likely to succeed on the merits and vacated McGlynn's order. So that's still Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals had that ruling. That was a 3-judge panel. You've got the plaintiffs in that case requesting the full en banc panel review the case on Second Amendment grounds. So that's still being dealt with the appeals court. But federal firearms licensee, who was, along with other plaintiffs, back in the Southern District on the issue of the gun registration, they had their status hearing yesterday. So that's just the background of where we're at, right? Still stuff going on in the Seventh Circuit. A lot of stuff still going on in the Seventh Circuit, but you also have in the Southern District questions still arising. And we still have yet to see what happens with the vagueness questions that Thomas Magg had oral arguments on with Judge Stephen McGlynn against the state back in October, if you recall. So you can still search and find some of those details, but still no outcome yet. McGlynn has not issued any kind of ruling in that case. But you have the question around the gun registry and the emergency rules around the registry. And those emergency rules were filed late September by Illinois State Police just before the October 1st opening of the registry. A lot of questions. We've had 3 public hearings with Illinois State Police. A lot of people couldn't hear during some of those public hearings, but State Police said they hope to get answers to public questions. We also have the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules that's dealing with all this. So there's no question. There is a lot of moving pieces on all of this. But yesterday, back in the Southern District, Judge Stephen McGlynn had a status hearing with the plaintiffs from the federal firearms licensees of Illinois and other plaintiffs, plus Christopher Wells, who was there representing Governor J.B. Pritzker. So you had Carl Michel of FFL of Illinois representing them, also Sean Brady and Costas Morris, but also you had Chris Wells represented by Governor Pritzker represented by Chris Wells. Judge McGlynn he started off talking about, quotes, I'd like to give you additional time. If you followed me on Twitter, you can actually see this for yourself. But Judge McGlynn said, I'd like to give you additional time to actually put together the arguments. And he says that he wants oral arguments with a ruling before January 1st. So this is where I think we get into a little speculation as to what could possibly happen here, right? I mean, if you've got the judge who had previously issued a preliminary injunction against the law back in late April, remember that 6-day window where the state was enjoined from enforcing the law before the state got a stay from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals? Well, Judge McGlynn was the one that issued that preliminary injunction from a federal court, from a federal bench, all right, in the district court. So while they're still dealing with the Second Amendment question in the appeals court, McGlynn now has this question of, well, should the registration deadline be suspended while this is dealt with in the courts? So regardless, yesterday's status hearing talked about, the availability of each other. Brady for the plaintiffs didn't expect to bring forward any witnesses during oral arguments. Again, McGlynn saying that he wanted oral arguments before the January 1st deadline so he can get a ruling in before then. McGlynn said he wants the litigants to make a record because it's very important that the public record and the oral arguments be clear and be concise. The judge says that he wanted to do it in person at the courthouse in East St. Louis, but some of the plaintiffs and the defense couldn't necessarily be there right away. So what they ultimately went forward with is December 12th. They picked that date after some discussion back and forth at 2:30 p.m. So December 12th, 2:30. That's when the oral arguments are going to be had virtually. So I imagine that since that's going to be virtual, it might be streamed, but not something that you can actually capture or rebroadcast. I think might be via phone availability. I'm not too sure, but it apparently is going to be a virtual hearing. So McGlynn said, the judge, oral arguments are very important. It's very important matters, and there's a lot of moving pieces here. The judge went on to talk about how, he has yet to hear a mandate back from the Seventh Circuit on the ruling on the Second Amendment issues, right? Because think about that. You've got the judge who issued the preliminary injunction. It was stayed by the appeals court, and then the appeals court heard oral arguments. Regardless of the Supreme Court being asked to intervene, Supreme Court said, the Seventh Circuit's doing a rocket docket, so they'll let them do their thing. They heard that case in late June. They sat on an opinion for more than 4 months, and then a handful of weeks ago, they released their opinion, vacating McGlynn's injunction. and saying the state had a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. Well, McGlynn, he says that he has yet to get a mandate back from the Seventh Circuit, well, because the process isn't done yet. We'll look at some of the other movements in various pieces of legislation, or litigation rather, coming up. But just looking at the time here, I want to get to the crux of what we're dealing with the Southern District case. So the federal firearms licensees of Illinois, they were essentially bringing this issue of the gun registration back to the Southern District. And again, that's what was being dealt with yesterday, not the Second Amendment issues. And even Wells asked for clarification from Judge McGlynn, essentially laying out that, hey, what is this? Is this about the Second Amendment, or should they only be addressing the gun registry? And McGlynn said what's in front of the Seventh Circuit is the gun ban case. This is a gun registration case. Two different things, different tests, different approaches that could apply. So McGlynn said that plaintiffs suggested Second Amendment's implicated, at least in part of their argument. But again, this is a gun registration case now back at the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court. So clearly, there's a lot here, and it's going to be fascinating. But December 12th at 2:30, that's on the docket for the case that federal firearms licensees of Illinois have brought forward to challenge the gun registry. And if we look at the latest docket entries from the court, you could see here that the hearing is set December 12th, 2:30. Then you had another entry due to the complexity of the arguments. Motion for preliminary injunction. Defendant's request to exceed the 20-page limit is granted. Defendants need not file a motion requesting to exceed the page limit in connection with their response. So they're going to file some documentation in their arguments against the preliminary injunction motion to hold the January 1st deadline in lieu of some kind of final judgment on the merits of all of this. There you are. There's tons of other stuff going on, including the latest out of the case concerning the federal firearms licensees, industries, gun dealers, gun manufacturers, the liability lawsuit that the state passed. There's been movement there. We'll have to unpack some of that. We've also had other national cases concerning firearm identification cards. So that's another big issue out of Maryland, for instance. There's just been a ton all over the place, and we'll actually review a lot of this and more. So stay tuned. Tons coming up here with Bishop on Air. We will connect with Todd Vandermeide next. All right, it's a little late in getting to him, but we'll try to make that connection here in just moments. If you need to follow along, Bishop on Air, you can find me anywhere. Just search Bishop on Air and make that happen. All right, we'll be right back. All right, guys, just stand by. Hoping to connect here with Todd. It looks like we are getting him pulled in right now. So let me make sure that we can hear him. This is all live. Switching this here in the early morning hours. Not typically as early as it used to be, but looks like we're getting him pulled up. He's got to get his audio configurations together, and then we'll just do it live. We'll do it live.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Todd Vandermeid. All right. Fantastic. Look at
I've
that.
just got a still image of you.
That's fine. Yeah. And that's to be expected. Just because of the way I've got all this set up. So let me make sure I can get you just right as well. So we can rock and roll. What is this? Let's do full screen. All right, Todd Vandermeid, thanks for taking time with me this morning. Typically, last time I talked to you live on a program was when I was on terrestrial radio, but glad you're able to join me live here and to make this happen. So let's kick this off. All right, so we covered what happened with the federal firearms licensees of Illinois case, and that was, of course, rather fascinating to see some of that roll out. But, go ahead and, I guess, give us the lowdown of your understanding of are we going to see a ruling before the January 1st deadline kicks in of the gun registry after hearing what Judge Stephen McGlynn had to say yesterday?
Yes, he was the state originally wanted more time and wanted to push it off, and the judge said no. He recognizes the tight timeline and deadlines that we are on here. And I think that he said, and you tweeted about it, that he was going to get a ruling out shortly after the oral arguments. The oral arguments are scheduled for 12/12. So I think we will see a ruling not long after. And remember, when he ruled on the initial injunction against the gun ban, it did not take that long for him to rule.
Yeah, not nearly as long as, say, for instance, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which took more than 4 months, even though there was still that pending request of the U.S. Supreme Court to take a look in the Naperville case. But interesting to see how quick this may move, considering that January 1st deadline. Todd, tons of other stuff's happened as well. The liability lawsuits against the gun industry, that case is still moving. I don't know if you saw the latest updates there, but the state's filed a motion to essentially dismiss the case out of a question of venue. The plaintiffs have said, no, that's not the case at all. This is very much the right venue, and our members are being injured by this continuing to go on and not be dealt with. And I just saw yesterday as well, the state filed for yet another delay in responding to these particular issues. So you've got that to contend with as well. But you've also done deep dives and stuff that's happening across the country. If you could tell us what is the comparison between what happened in Maryland and what that could mean for a state like Illinois that has that firearm owner identification card required for people to be able to not just purchase but own not just firearms but ammunition.
So yesterday, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a case that was argued back in March, ruled that their version of a FOID card is unconstitutional in a 2-1 ruling. So going through this, Maryland requires fingerprints and mandatory training before you can apply to get a card in order to buy a handgun. So it's similar to a FOID card, but it's like the FOID card on steroids in certain ways, like we've seen the anti-gunners in the legislature try to propose. And we saw the Attorney General's Office of Maryland do a lot of what the Illinois AG has argued in our FOID card case here, where they have argued that the militia laws allowed for the registering or listing of people and firearms. And this Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals took that argument apart and said, nope, it's not analogous. So under the New York test, if conduct is implicated in the Second Amendment in the text, then the burden shifts to the government. The government must show analogy or regulation law stemming from 1791 that addresses the conduct here. And there was nothing there. So with that, they found, the state admitted in the Maryland case there were no analogous laws. They said that twice at the oral arguments. And then they made these other arguments about militia laws that we have seen the attorney general here try to bootstrap up. And so the court said, no, you can't do this. And they talked about the 30-day wait that that it doesn't implicate my right to ultimately possess a firearm on the front side. But it says I can't possess one today because I have to go through all these steps. And at a minimum, if I already have the training, if my fingerprints are already submitted and all that, I have to wait 30 days. Well, contrast that with the FOID card here in Illinois, that we've had people wait over a year to get a renewal or something. And now with the change in the law from a couple of years ago, they have 60 business days, which equates to a 12-week timeline. Now, the stats on the FOID card website are saying that they're getting it done in less than that, but it's still a delay on somebody, a first timer, being able to exercise their rights. So with that, I think this says this imports very poorly for Illinois' FOID card, and I think that it's getting to the point where the FOID card is on life support.
So when it comes though to how to get to that point, we've got cases that have been in state court. You got cases that have been in federal court. I think one case is possibly in federal court going to come up late next year when it was docketed. So
yeah, I don't know why that case is being drug out the way it is. Remember, like you just reported, the Attorney General's office is notorious for seeking extensions and dragging things out. And I think that is part of their strategy. They had that strategy when Scalia was on the court. They kept thinking, since it was 5-4 Heller, 5-4 McDonald, that if they just waited out and got one of the conservatives to die, they would start getting rulings that were more to their liking. And Ginsburg was open about overturning Heller. I think that it went the other direction. And so their strategy is with a 6-3 court is much the same. If Biden gets another term, if another Democrat steps in, and they have the Senate, then they're trying to drag this out, hoping for a more favorable playing field. That I think is everything. Why the current case is not in the federal courts is not moving any faster, I don't know. But obviously, if we have this crazy Seventh Circuit with Judge Easterbrook up there trying to manipulate things, then we'll see. But the ball is now in Maryland's court. Maryland's governor has threatened that they'll do everything they can to uphold this. So,
but as of right now, Marylanders who've had to comply with this law, is it they now can go out and buy a handgun, for instance?
No, it's still in effect. They've declared the law unconstitutional, but it's still in effect today because if you were listening to Judge McGlynn yesterday, he said that while the court has ruled, there has no mandate that's been come down.
That's right.
So there's if you go back to the Cook County ammo tax, the Supreme Court in Illinois ruled the tax unconstitutional, but there's like a 21-day lag time before the order becomes final.
Right.
And in that window, Cook County reinstituted and thought that they would play games with it. And that's why I have a lawsuit against Cook County for the ammo tax that is still working its way through the system. So it's not that it goes away today. The real question is, are we going to get en banc there? Because the fourth has a habit of doing what California does. You get good 3-judge panel rulings, and then the en banc panel sits there and undoes what they did.
Not at request of the the losing side of this either, right? I mean, isn't that kind of what happened in California? Was the full panel of judges were just like, okay, we didn't like that lower panel ruling, so we're coming in.
Yeah, California's got a different matrix on the Duncan case, and some of the politics being played with that behind the scenes are pretty egregious for judicial conduct. When you have judges openly criticizing other judges, I think that is a big deal. But so the question is, does the state the state of Maryland, are they going to go en banc, which I think is a distinct possibility that they go en banc trying to overturn this? And then if they don't, it's up to the Supreme Court, and it would be very, very interesting to see what happens there, because we get split circuits. There's a lot going on there. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going up. I'm actually sitting here. I was making my notes out for a video I'm going to do today about this case in Michigan about a range. And not to give too much of it away, but that could set up another split in the circuits when it comes to training and ranges. So the more these splits in the circuits we have, the more this stuff is going to get flushed out. And then the question becomes, does the Supreme Court take a case and try to delineate much brighter lines than they have in the New York case? Obviously, the lines weren't bright enough in McDonald and Heller because the appellate courts kept playing games with this. Now, in my mind, what would be really nice is, if you remember at the end of the term last year when New York was decided, there are 4 pending cases, a couple of magazine cases, a gun ban, and a carry case. And those cases were granted, vacated, and remanded. See New York. Um, I would uh, I would like to see, let's just say that you have an en banc panel that goes contrary to what the 3 judge panel did against us. So I would like the Supreme Court to grant cert at the end of the term, vacate the ruling of the en banc panel that's against us, and affirm the lower court decision of the 3 judge panel. And just, there you go. We don't have to go months and months and months with orals and briefs and all that, and just kind of, no, you idiots got it wrong.
Well, it goes to show just how quickly these things can get mired down in the process, and especially when it comes to individual, guaranteed inalienable rights like the right of free speech, the right of free assembly, the right to keep and bear arms, the right against improper search and seizure, the right of not incriminating yourself, the right of a whole host of having due process, and so on. These are important fundamental rights, but they can quickly get mired down not just in the legal process. But Todd, you very well know, you probably have a better grasp on all the different types of cases there are across the country. The minutia of the details, right? I mean, here's Maryland talking about an ID card scheme for handgun purchases. Illinois has a ID card scheme for any purchases, or
not only that, it's any possession.
Well, in possession as well, but also. I've seen cases pop up around the country about whether or not gun stores can exist. You get down into all of these different issues, and it's clear that there is an effort to somewhat water down the Second Amendment. How much of this do you think is going to be a major political issue heading into the 2024 election?
This is going to sound way cynical. It's going to depend on the next mass shooting as to how big the issue is. I mean, the Democrats in Virginia, they just won the House, the Senate, and they're making a play for a semi-auto ban. I think they're still butthurt because when the Republicans took over a few years ago, they undid one gun a month, and it really drove them nuts about that their gains were being repealed. It wasn't just hold the line, but they were actually going out and repealing some of the bullshit that they had passed before. But you have a Republican governor with Glenn Youngkin. And I think the problem for the gun community, and this is going to rankle some of my conservative brethren, is the pro-life movement. The Dobbs decision is giving the Democrats dividends because they are flogging that to death. And you had the Republican governor pushing an abortion ban, and that drove the Democratic turnout. And J.B. Pritzker is contributing money, millions of dollars around the country. And their playbook is that they are going to drive referendums for constitutional amendments at the state constitutional level to drive Democratic turnout in 2024. Right now, they know Joe Biden is a drag on their ticket, so they have to have something else. Gun control has never been that great of a motivator for the Democrats. And I think the problem is with the Dobbs decision is that, for 50 years, you had the pro life movement out there and the Republicans largely in sync saying, yes, we oppose Roe. They had no plan to combat it once the dog caught the car. In my opinion, that's what you have. You've got a dog who has chased a car. They now caught the car. What do I do with it now that I caught it? And they had zero plans for what to do with this. And they have they have no message. I think Nikki Haley's had about the best messaging on the subject as far as politics goes. Not taking a stand one way or the other.
And you're talking about the
But
abortion issue.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I think that you ask, so depending on whether or not there is another mass shooting to get the Democrats to wipe the blood of innocents all over their white shirts and act like Jesse Jackson did at Martin Luther King's assassination, I don't that's going to drive it. I don't think guns themselves. I mean, we know what they do. There's some depraved individual commits a horrendous shooting. They go smearing blood all over themselves and waving, the bloody rags from the scene in front of everybody. And depending on the shooting, that's pretty crass and cynical. But depending on the type of shooting, it catches media attention or it's out of the headlines right away. And I think those two things are going to drive what happens with the gun issue.
Well, Todd, I mean, I've got to get to another segment here in just a moment, but we're going to have to revisit all of this, and really, I want to get your at least initial blush response. Maybe we could do a deeper dive soon. What is the Second Amendment community's response to that? How do you, I guess, combat that narrative of them using a horrible tragedy for political means?
I think they have to get more active. I've always said that if you want to win this fight, then every gun owner needs to simply walk one block either side of their house, both sides of the street, talking to their neighbors about candidates. And because you've had people knock on your door for politics. I'm running for so and so, or we're here canvassing for so and so, and you kind of go, yeah. But if I'm your neighbor and we drink beer together and I come walking over and said, hey, Greg, can you put a sign in your yard for this guy? I think I like him. He's a really good guy. Well, why are you supporting him? Here's why I'm supporting him. I think you and I are kind of alike on this. That's going to carry a lot more weight than some random person knocking on your door because you're a Republican voter or a Democratic voter or whatever. I know that in my union, 30% of my union brothers are diehard conservatives. And I shoot with a bunch of these guys, and we're always talking about stuff. So the way you get to winning votes on this is you got to be personable and you got to talk to people that that are within your sphere of influence, and that includes your neighbors. I mean, most of my neighbors are apolitical. You hear out of them what you'd hear if you were sitting at the bar and the topic came up or whatever. But if you go in their garage and you're having drinks with them and you're just chewing the fat and you start, hey, this is why and this is important, you'll have a bigger impact on that. That's always been my belief, that you can have a bigger impact on your neighbor. Now, you're always going to have a diehard that's lefty because of, or a diehard person on the right for whatever issue. You're going to have those members that are just, they're a diehard, SEIU member or whatever. Well, don't waste your time. But look at how many people don't vote. Look at if you can make a local connection. That's how the gun guys need to win. They really do. The problem is the gun guys think we have it all within the Supreme Court, and they forget about the politics of it. They forget about, I'm always taking people out to shoot. I'm always
they don't just forget about the politics of it. They may also forget about the timeline of it. I mean, just look how long it's taking to get through this.
And the problem is that when I was working in Springfield, you would always see the anti-gunners. They had moms who had no day job, who were busybodies, who had nothing else to do but to scold everybody else like they were their children. And then you had the city crew bussing in people. A lot of our guys are productive people. They work 9 to 5. Those hearings the state police held were not conducive to letting to a lot of our people get there. Downtown Chicago, first thing in the morning, all that kind of stuff. So that's always a problem. And I think, it goes back to what Ronald Reagan called the silent majority. I think gun sales alone tells you. Now with Israel and national politics, international politics, it's interesting how many people who were averse to guns, anti-gun even, are now changing their mindset, seeing what's going on over in Israel, where they were slaughtered by the bushel by people who are less than barbarians.
Well, not even just that, Todd. I had a conversation recently with somebody who lived in the neighborhood where that Illinois State police officer was shot by that wanted murderer out of Chicago here in Springfield. And they said, listen, when that happened, there was an armed individual running around our neighborhood at 1:30 in the morning. And they were concerned about their family's safety and thought about, I probably should go buy a firearm. So that's an interesting conversation. Todd Vandermite being the first live guest with my home production here with Bishop on Air. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll definitely be connecting again soon, all right? So hopefully you're able to still get up this early in the morning, and obviously you are, because
dude, this is nothing. We got rained out at the gun club, so... And we got the holiday weekend. Today is my anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Yeah, 27 years with that angel of a wife that I have.
Congratulations.
Way above my weight class.
Well, the best to you and your wife and your family, and happy Thanksgiving. Now go over and take her some breakfast in bed, man. I mean, come on.
We got the grandkids over already. So,
Thumbs
but
up.
the issue is, hey, watch Freedom Steel. I will have a bunch of videos coming out this weekend as I try to get caught up on current events. So
it'll be good
thanks
stuff.
for everything, Greg.
Appreciate that. We'll talk again soon. Todd Vandermite, everybody, with Freedom Steel. All right, stay tuned. We've got another segment, and that is the Council Corral, a look at last night's Springfield City Council meeting. So that is on the way here with Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, follow along. If you want to support the show, you can grab some merchandise just in time for Black Friday, right? I think they got sales going on. I don't know. I have some third-party do it. They take care of it, and you can pick whatever kind of logos you want. So make that happen, all right? Appreciate the support, everyone. All right, so stay tuned. We got the Council Corral coming your way next, all right? Right here with Bishop on Air. All right, it's time for the Council Corral. A look at last night's Springfield City Council meeting. Had last week off, but they had a committee of the whole where they dealt with a whole bunch of ordinances, and I kind of wish I was going back and listening to that 2+ hour conversation, because apparently there was a lot of conversation about some of the things. But last night's meeting, also about 2 hours, so a lot to tackle. All right, so let's go ahead and get right on into it. And one thing about the Springfield City Council, I've been following it for like 13 years now. It's fascinating to see the procedure, how it plays out. I think that it's also important, at least for people in central Illinois, especially within Sangamon County. This is a way for you to understand how city government's working, because you spend a lot of your tax dollars in Springfield. Even though you don't live in Springfield, still something I think that you gotta understand how local government works, and that's one reason why I like doing this as well. Is it lets you kind of see that local element, and one thing that a former politician said that I thought really resonated was the most complex an issue is, the better it's resolved locally, right? So the more complex things are, the more local the decision should be. And that's what local government's really about, right? I mean, a lot of people focus on Washington, D.C. A lot of people focus on maybe, what's happening in states like Illinois or California or New York City or Chicago or LA, for instance. But really, there's the most impact on the taxpayer and the individual citizen as to what's going on with local governments, what's going on with state governments. And I think even the COVID-19 pandemic really put a spotlight on just how important local government is. So that's why I think that, things like the council corral are extremely important. But without further ado, let's get right on into it. A lot to tackle, including an ordinance that was up for consideration during zoning last night. Because zoning happens at once a month before a full city council meeting, and that was that meeting last night. So they had an ordinance up for consideration, a docket for the zoning portion of the meeting about adult use cannabis and setback limits.
Clarifications on the record of the staff's observations are below and recommended. See comments in the zoning package. Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation is denied.
So you've got the city council taking up this zoning question, and even though the zoning board of sorts is like, no, this is a bad idea, the setbacks. What exactly are the setbacks? The corporation council lays that out a bit.
The proposed amendment number 1 would add adult use cannabis processing organizations to the 1,000-foot setback. That type of cannabis establishment was inadvertently left out of the proposed changes, so we're just adding that in 3 places.
All right, thank you.
So, again, changing the setbacks for the cannabis businesses. I think that's interesting to hear about. They ultimately, regardless of, a group saying, oh, we should deny this, they went ahead and approved that, I believe. So next up, you've got questions about financing. You had the corporation council, the city treasurer, provide the treasurer's report with tens of millions of dollars in the city's coffers, but there was like around $16 million that was for COVID-19 ARPA relief that is still in the city's pockets. And while they say that they've got it laid out for those monies already being spent, Alderman Chuck Redpath wanted to make sure that it was clear just exactly where those dollars were going.
We were informed at the beginning of the new council that a lot of the money that's in the fund balance is appropriated. Can we get a breakdown of that sometime soon to see what is appropriated and what the real balance is going to be without those ordinances?
I've seen that number drop over time from 22 million to 19 million, and now it's like at 16 million or so. So they will be moving forward with that. Up next, you've got a lot of conversation about the police and how to attract more police. If you saw this segment with John Catanzaro, one thing that we didn't talk about out of Chicago was he's being, recruited, not he personally, but police are, to other states. Florida offering $5,000 signing bonuses. There's jurisdictions in Alaska that are offering up $60,000 signing bonuses for police, recruiting police. So there's been a lot of question about how to keep police in Illinois. Of course, we've got the Safety Act and the Pretrial Fairness Act and questions about whether or not police are treated properly. But what about pay? Here's a pretty lengthy clip with former Springfield Alderman Joe McMiniman raising question about bonuses for police officers and a change of starting pay. And it was part of a slew of ordinances that were in front of the city council last night on final passage dealing with pay for police. And here's the exchange between the former city councilman Joe McMiniman, who served 3 terms and was term limited out, talking with new Springfield Mayor Misty Buscher.
So Joe McMiniman signed up to speak on agenda items number 2023-521, 2023-522, 2023-523, 2023-527, and 2023-537. So there will be 5 minutes allotted.
No, for right now, Mayor, I'm just speaking to an ordinance that's on consent, and that ordinance is
You're getting 5 minutes for these, sir.
Excuse me. I signed up for, as each ordinance is coming up for discussion, I signed up for them separately, and I think the city clerk understood it that way.
I don't think that's in our rules that someone can sign up for multiple ordinances. Don't we just do we're allowing people to talk, but normally, shouldn't that be at the public comment portion?
So we allow individuals to talk during or on ordinances, but they're allotted 5 minutes in total. So when they
For the
choose
whole
to speak,
meeting.
they get 5 minutes for public comment. That's correct.
So you don't get you can't sign up for, in this case, 5 ordinances and get 25 minutes.
Correct.
That's
I
right.
think this is important to watch because of the process questions, right? You do want more public engagement, more public opinion, more public comments, but sometimes those public comments are limited and for certain reasons. So here's Alderman McMiniman frustrated
Chair
with that.
recognizes you for 5 minutes total this evening, sir.
That's fine. If you want to cut me off at 5 minutes, but please don't interrupt while I'm talking, Madam Chair. So I don't know where to go now because I had really prepared for this to some great extent, really wanted to be helpful to our city council on 5 different ordinances.
And he went on to talk about, the pay for police and the signing bonuses, and it was like a $1 million total cost for signing bonuses and retention bonuses. But there was also elements in there about increasing the starting pay for the different stages of, sworn officers.
So we've got $1.4 million for sign-on bonuses and retention bonuses. The new collective bargaining agreement for hiring officers, they're currently hired at the rate of $52,000. If someone's hired today, they're hired at the rate of $52,000. Under the collective bargaining agreement, as of March of 2024, the starting pay for a newly hired officer will be $81,000. So
and he went on to talk about as well the cost of even higher ranking officers and how they will get paid even more. And that's an added cost to the taxpayer, no question about it. It also would add to the pensions and the pension liability that the city has, which the city, it's something we're going to have to talk about in another segment, maybe next week after the holidays. But there's a question about police and fire pension funds in front of the Illinois Supreme Court. They had a hearing yesterday where you had people challenging taking 650 police and fire pension funds from across the state outside of Chicago. Chicago not affected by this. But you've got 650, local police and fire pension funds that have been pulled into 2 separate funds, one for police and one for firefighters. And there's questions about, should a well-funded fund have to be lumped in with a poorly funded fund? In Springfield, the fund, it's of need of some help. There's tens of millions of dollars of unfunded liability. And Alderman McMiniman has been talking about this for 15 years, even before I'm sure he was elected to the city council 12 years ago. But here he is back in front of the Springfield City Council with questions and concerns about the cost of police and fire contracts, especially when it comes to the cost to the taxpayers.
Right. If we pass the collective bargaining agreement tonight, just about any officer, particularly I'm concerned about the senior officers, will have a bump in pay of 16%. And the way the police and fire pensions work is your pension is based on your rate of pay on the last day of your work. So anyone who retires after what you're going to consider later on today, who retires after that collective bargaining agreement is passed, will immediately get a 16% rate in pay. They could retire the next day, and basically they've just primed or spiked or pumped their pension by 16%.
So Alderman McMiniman continuing to raise question about, his ability to speak on these issues.
I will ask for the Inspector General to review the question regarding how much time someone has to speak. I had separate comments for each. I spent more than I'm going to go 5 minutes on this one because I'm not going to have an opportunity to talk later on, which is really, it's kind of a disgrace for a former alderman to be treated this way, to be honest. So I'm very disappointed, and I don't know how someone should be treated this way. So
Thank you for your
Alderpersons.
time, sir.
So
very much.
Alderman McMiniman saying it's a disgrace for him as a former alderman to be treated that way. You had the Springfield Police Chief Ken Scarlett get up to address those concerns.
I think we're talking about disgraceful. What's disgraceful is assuming that the men and women that put this uniform on day in and day out to protect this city only do it for the money. That's absolutely the farthest thing from their mind when they respond to calls for service on a daily basis. It's about keeping this city safe. It's about keeping in line with other officers. And one thing that I heard about from you all earlier this year in February was how are we going to recruit and how are we going to retain good officers? One of the things that you all voted 10-0, I'm sorry, Alderman McMiniman was sitting up there at the time when you all voted 10-0, was to add this 10% salary adjustment so that we could be in line with our comparables. And that's simply what has happened here.
And the comparables, he says, are pretty significant. And instead of having a police officer come in for 3 years and then, go off to, say, Decatur, right down the street, or Peoria, just about 45 minutes north, it's important to recruit and keep them here in Springfield, the capital city.
This is about showing them the respect that they deserve and becoming, as Alderman Redpath put it, we are the capital city. We should want people to come work for us. Part of that is the financial component. So it upsets me to think that the only thing that we think about when it comes to law enforcement is money, because that's the farthest thing from anyone's mind that wears this uniform.
So Police Chief Ken Scarlett, again, talking about the importance of the retention bonuses and the increased pay for police officers with the new contract. You then had Alderman Roy Williams Jr. jump in with some of his concerns, really raising issue with how, the costs of this weren't necessarily as transparent as they wanted them to be for the people who are going to be voting on this issue.
Police is a good thing. They should be paid fair, but we got a whole city to run. We got a whole budgeting process coming up, and this is an awful lot. So my question is, do we have our physical impact statements? Because I can't find them.
It was emailed to you.
Emailed. It's not in the packet tonight?
Well, the fiscal impact statement is attached to the grant for, that we're talking about for the recruitment and retention grant on consent. And
so, question, of course, did he get the fiscal impact of the retention bonuses, of the signing bonuses, of the new employment contract?
The fact that we voted
Here's
on
Alderman
other
Hanauer.
union contracts not had fiscal impact, and now all of a sudden we want a fiscal impact. And if you want to see them, I've got them here, Alderman.
See what?
These are all the old ordinances from 22, and I think, let's see here, yeah, most of them are from 22. They did not have fiscal impact statements that we voted on. They were contracts with other unions.
So I guess, Mayor, my question, and what I'm getting at is, and that's all fine and good. And maybe what you're saying may be a fact, but what is our rule? I've been sent something that tells me as an alderman that we should have physical statements and that those are our council rules. Is
So
that
you
true?
have them, and this administration appreciates that you're holding me to a different standard than the previous one. Thank you.
Well, so you can make the difference, though. If it wasn't right back then, and as far as Hanauer was concerned, so we're just going to continue to make it bad, or are we going to do our jobs and be fiscal responsible, Mayor?
Sent them to you, sir,
You sent them to me.
in your email.
More on that in just a moment, but Alderman Chuck Redpath wanted to jump in with some of his concerns.
Let's get around the politics and the nonsense that's going on right here tonight. We all know that our police department was number 10 in salary of cities their size in this state. They were last. They were last. We were losing recruits to Decatur and Bloomington and Champaign and Rockford and Peoria. We were losing recruits to them.
And he went on to talk about
the polling that I did.
What the public wants to do with the tax dollars that they're given.
The polling that I did and my campaigns did before I ran for re-election showed that the city of Springfield wants to be safe. The number one issue in this city is safety for people to walk from their car to the grocery store so they don't get hit in the head. And these people lay their lives on the line every day. This is ridiculous. We're even arguing about this. These salary adjustments, you know what it does? It puts them comparable to Peoria, right at the top. And you know what? It's a reasonable contract that we have to deal with. We have to make the sacrifice at this city council to give these people what they deserve. This is embarrassing that we have to fight this stupid fight right now for politics, not for anything else. The money's in the budget. We passed $2.3 million to make the salary adjustments last term. We did it. And it's something that has to be done. And show your guts on this city council and vote for those people.
So again, Alderman Chuck Redpath, formerly in the law enforcement community, I'm sure once law enforcement, always law enforcement, very much a advocate for law enforcement. And he's talking about the importance of, being comparable to other similar municipalities in pay and trying to recruit and to retain, because it's not just about recruitment, it's about retention as well. Alderman Williams, though, wanted to continue asking about that fiscal impact note. When did he get that note, and where was that note sent?
We're just talking about the grant right now, or are we talking about the bonuses, or where are we at, Mayor?
The consent agenda is what we're discussing.
Thank you. And one more thing. When did you send the email?
Last night, I think at 10 o'clock.
Last night.
It's pretty late.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Wow. I would prefer that we not cuss up here, Alderman.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, doing a previous program on terrestrial radio, I'd have had to have edited that out, but hey, it's the internet. All right, there were a couple other big issues that came up last night, but here's a little bit of, the idea of exactly how state grant dollars are used by local governments to do things like try to curb violent crime. You hear a lot about the dollars that go to Chicago, the tens of millions of dollars that go to Chicago for violence interruption. But what about some of the other communities across the state in the capital city of Springfield? They've got a $3 million grant several weeks ago that they got approved, but there was questions about some of the other community groups within Ward 2 and 3 with Alderman Sean Gregory and Alderman Roy Williams Jr. And these community groups getting some of those grant dollars. So again, your tax dollars. All right, you're paying tax dollars to the city, you're paying your tax dollars to the county, you're paying your tax dollars to the state, you're paying your tax dollars to the feds give grants to the state gives grants to the municipality, so you can see how all these funds kind of wash through that cycle. I'm choosing my words very deliberately. But regardless, how those dollars ultimately get back to, possibly making a dent in, say, violent crime, for instance. Here's some conversation about several grants that the city was looking to pass, but was it being done in the right process? Did they have these grants picked out beforehand, and are they going to be able to comply with what the state's looking for to release those grant dollars? Here's some of the back and forth between Alderman Ralph Hanauer, Alderman Sean Gregory, Alderwoman Erin Conley, Alderman Roy Williams, and so on.
Has just, we've gone through the whole grant process, right? And now this is just at the end, we're putting this in. And I'm just concerned. I don't want to get in trouble with the state of Illinois or any other grant people. I have nothing against, I have nothing against any of these groups, but I think that the precedent of us getting involved and picking and choosing who we're putting in the grant when a formal RFP, and I don't know, Chief, I'll have to ask you or Josh, I guess, but when we did this grant, it was a formal RFP that went out to everyone. Was there responses? How was it done? Because if there was, and these guys didn't get chosen, then what we're doing is we're superseding the RFPs that we're putting out. And I have a real problem with that.
It's an interesting point, making sure that you've got the the guarantee that the funds are going to be there before you pass an ordinance to release those funds. Others would say, no, let's go ahead and just get it out there. That way, once it is approved, we can go ahead and release those dollars. It's like the chicken or the egg. Which came first? Regardless, taxpayers are the ones that are footing the bill here. But Police Chief Ken Scarlett, who's going to be overseeing these grant dollars, it says, listen, just got to make sure we get the dollars into the community.
Last week was, I don't care how we spend that money, as long as we can spend it to where my department is engaging our community members, and we're acting as mentors and being able to reduce violence and create relationships within our community. Outside of that, I am not concerned with how the money is spent.
Alderwoman Conley, she said she does have concern with how these dollars ultimately do get granted in her state job. She hears from those applying for grants to a state agency and follows that process closely, monitoring that process closely.
I don't think that procedurally this is a great way to handle this. We've not seen scope of work from, I haven't seen any of them, and I apologize, Chief. I didn't realize you had it and probably should have asked for it, but there's still so many other steps between the allocation, between us taking action and the allocation of these funds that I feel like we're moving out of order in this.
So again, what's the scope of work for these granted organizations, these community groups? I think they discussed one was a boxing gym where they were going to have mentors to facilitate positive role models and to teach them about boxing and life skills. You've got other community groups that have looked for these types of dollars to provide similar opportunities, but there wasn't like a request for proposal, like a bidding process, right? It wasn't like there were 12 different organizations that said, hey, I'm raising my hand. I want to get some of the hundreds of thousands of dollars you have laid out here. Here's my proposal, and here's my list of expenses and how much I'm saying that it's going to cost this, that, and the other. That's not necessarily be done in this process. So that's why some alder people have concerns about just granting these dollars. But in Ward 3, where some of these organizations are, Roy Williams Jr. talked about, listen, these are state dollars, still your tax dollars, that State Senator Doris Turner in Springfield has found and put into the budget for the state. So the budget's there. But Williams Jr., he talks about how he feels like there's some gamesmanship going on.
Here we are tonight asking 1,000 questions and being confused over such a small amount of money that ain't even the money like the money we really been spending, without asking for fiscal analysis, without being responsible. We won't ask about all that other stuff, but we'll pick the heck out of money that has to go to community engagement for the East Side. The 2 wards, that's what the senator said. I want the gun violence stopped in Ward 2 and 3. We signed off on it. Chief, you signed it. I signed it. Do you remember this? We signed that piece.
So again, the idea of they all agreed on this a while back, but it's just a matter of well, sure, those dollars are going to go to that area, but which organizations are going to get those dollars? And they ultimately did approve these ordinances with several one-off no votes or a present votes, for instance, because I think there was a relation to Roy Williams Jr. for one of the grantees getting the money. But regardless, more of the back and forth here.
This is a shame. That's all I'm going to say. This is a shame that you've been on the council this long and you guys don't understand the process, what's before and after. And I sit up here and everything from Kids Zim to you name it, I don't get into the scope because I feel like, well, wait a minute. That's why we have staff. That's why we have staff to take care of all that and trust you and do that. But they'll sit up and say, oh beautiful you are in your department. And all that didn't take us through pure hell to get just a small amount of money. It does not make sense to me, and it's really telling to me. And we need to quit playing games. This ain't hard.
So again, Roy having some questions there. The alderman, he feels like there's gamesmanship going on. But other older people are just like, we're just wanting to provide proper oversight. How do you balance that without accusations of being called divisive? Alderwoman Conley didn't take kindly to that accusation of just trying to be divisive in this and got into a back and forth with Alderman Sean Gregory, which led to Gregory having to actually leave the room.
Nothing is stopped by asking that the chief take this through the grant process prior to us
pass it and let's go.
voting on allocating it.
Let's pass it, let's go.
Okay, I'm done. Although, actually, no, I do want to say, I'm very clear on this process, and I do understand how this works. That's why I have concerns about passing an open-ended ordinance that just relies.
But you didn't ask that
I'm
last
done.
week.
Alderman.
You didn't ask that last week.
No,
you always
me.
the one.
Alderman Gregory,
Damn.
please let the alderwoman finish.
I very specific. I very specifically asked for this last week. And I very specifically asked last week if amendments can be submitted with or without council approval. There are processes in place. I'm not commenting on anything in this amendment except the process. And I think if we're going to talk about disingenuous, I'm going to say it's disingenuous to imply that anyone around this horseshoe has a problem with the community engagement portion of this grant, or the efforts that the police department has taken, or, to be fair, the efforts that Alderman Williams and Alderman Gregory have taken to increase engagement and decrease violence in their wards and in our city. Your wards are our city.
And again, they had these discussions back and forth. Regardless, Alderwoman Conley did vote against one of these. I think she may have voted against another one. I believe there were like 2 or 3. This is from like a 2-hour and 20-minute meeting. All right, I woke up this morning and watched it because it was last night when they had this meeting, and that's what the council corral is all about, getting you the latest, what happens at the Springfield City Council meeting, and hopefully, you're able to, kind of see, where your local meeting is happening and get access to it and go to it and see what's the buzz. But regardless, a 2-hour and 20-minute meeting, condensing it down here into under 30 minutes. Here's even more that happened last night. Interesting, of course, that was a separate issue with the grants going to the east side of Springfield to help with violence interdiction and whatnot. But you have other ordinances that are intergovernmental agreements between the city governments and the county government. And in particular, in Sangamon County, we have the Sangamon County Animal Control that contracts with the local municipalities, and in particular contracts with Springfield. And there's an ordinance for a supplemental of about $280,000, I believe. This isn't re-upping a new contract with them because there's always questions about the effectiveness of the county public health animal control department. But here's the discussion about the ordinance for that supplemental $280,000, where one alderman saying, hey, we're just paying for what we do, what we use as a city, while others say we already pay taxes. Why are we having to pay even more?
He gave me some
Here's Alderman Hanauer.
He gave me some statistics. The animal control expenses annually is $1.8 million. City payment is $284,000 and change. These are kind of rounded. Our portion is 15.54% of what goes into it. Now, the calls for services from the city, the total calls for services for the county is 5490. All right? Of those, the city makes up 4193, which is 76%. And so what they wanted to say is just, we're not paying what the amount of call percentage-wise compared to the rest of the county.
So Alderman Hanauer using some stats to say, hey, the county says we're not paying our fair share. Alderwoman Conley says, as taxpayers that live in Springfield also live in the county, they are paying the county taxes.
That as a resident of the city of Springfield, we're also residents of the county of Sangamon. The city pays this payment to the county. All of my pets have their rabies tags, which is another payment that I make to the county. I also pay my county taxes. So the majority of the residents live within the city of Springfield limits. So obviously that's where the majority of the calls are going to come from.
So I think that's an interesting point. We've heard this before in the past. I guarantee we'll hear even more about county animal control and the contract the city has with the county as being, above and beyond what city taxpayers already pay to the county in their annual taxes or property taxes. So regardless, interesting to hear that pop up. So now all of that was done. They had zoning. They had city business. The council corral, whenever we have interesting comments from the public, we will air those. One coming from a local environmentalist, activist, Nick Dodson. He also deals a lot with the homeless population in Springfield. He was also integral with a local environmental group to raise questions about the CO2 pipelines that were being proposed through central Illinois. One thing that I really like about the council meetings as well is you can kind of get all your news that you need to know by plugging in and watching these things. Because, listen, you had the Navigator CO2 pipeline that was filed last year, then taken away. They removed it, and then they refiled it, and then later on this year they went ahead and revoked or removed their application because there was so much opposition to it. Well, this week also, Wolf ADM pulled their CO2 permits application for a pipeline to take that noxious, industry byproduct and pipe it into the ground in deep in Illinois. So we've seen now two major proposals for pipelines to traverse most of central Illinois counties, especially right getting into central Illinois, to take this CO2 condensed gas and pipe it into the ground. Well, Nick Dotson talked about the opposition to that and how you've got two now that have been canceled, but he says there still seems to be a focus and a targeting of central Illinois to be a place that they can experiment with capturing CO2 and putting it deep into the ground. Here's what he had to say.
Significant safety, health concerns, skepticism, and direct opposition to carbon capture and sequestration with CO2 pipelines. Nearly every community member who stood up to offer public comment expressed strongly that they did not want these types of projects in our region. They were clear and they were united in their opposition. The Sangamon County Board listened and heard their constituents and responded by unanimously passing a moratorium on CO2 pipelines until more guidance on safety and regulations were available at a federal level.
So Dotson talked about how in Sangamon County they did indeed act, and the county government heard from the local groups, which was an interesting group of local farmers, property owners, environmentalists coming together saying no eminent domain for private gain. Seeing those billboards all over the place pushing against the CO2 pipeline issue. But he says while the opposition was clear, there still seems to be a focus on CO2 pipelines in central Illinois, and in particular in Springfield.
We have recently learned that CWLP has been using drones and conducting soil testing for a carbon capture pipeline installation on the west side of Pond Road. Now I watch City Council on it quite regularly, and I've never heard a mention of a local level CO2 pipeline.
And neither have I. And I think that is fascinating, something that will definitely require some more digging and possibly getting some public documentation and the like. More from Dodson from last night on this issue and why it's important that if the CWLP, City Water, Light and Power, which is the publicly owned coal-fired power plant and water supply, if they're looking at carbon capture and putting that deep into the ground through some kind of transmission source, that should be open to the public to have a debate about this.
Carbon capture operations may be well beyond CWLP's scope to manage safely, as we have seen their inability to manage coal waste with recent examples like the leaching coal ash ponds and the fly coal ash waste release in 2021. Waste storage and management is not an organizational forte. Due to the dangers of carbon storage and transportation that can result in explosions, asphyxiation of humans and wildlife, and the complexity and the energy expense in piping carbon underground, meetings to inform the public must be held to ensure transparency by CWLP. The public deserves to be a part of this process since it will directly affect their safety, community health, their utility rates, and the future of climate stability. It is incredibly troubling that CWLP is seriously considering such a risky investment and doing so without transparent discussion or public input. We know that the DOE funding has been awarded, but receiving millions of taxpayer dollars does not mean that our city should move forward with such a risky investment without rigorous and transparent financial and legal analysis, environmental considerations, and public input. The majority of carbon capture sequestration projects attempted to date have gone over budget, have either failed and been canceled, or have been significantly underperformed as emissions reduction strategies. Here are my questions. Where is the city in assessing the feasibility in a full carbon capture retrofit at Dahlman Plant, and has an economic and legal analysis been done? When will this decision be made, and will there be a public engagement process? Thanks.
So again, Nick Dotson with some questions about what to do with carbon sequestration, as you've got two major pipelines that have canceled their permits. What's CWLP doing? Apparently they're doing something, according to Dotson. So I think that's worth more conversation. But, it's all part of this idea of getting rid of coal-fired power plants, and carbon dioxide's bad, even though carbon dioxide is something that plants thrive on. You've got that debate ongoing, and who's influencing who to go to, utilities and say, shut them down, is while China is just, building coal-fired power plants left and right. It'd be interesting to follow the money on, the influence campaigns that are done on all of this. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to be off Thursday. I'm going to be off Friday. We'll be back at it Monday and bring you everything you need to know. So be sure to like, subscribe, follow along. We'll see you guys sooner rather than later. All right, Bishop on Air, signing off. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.